Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar for the economic outlook for the beautiful state of Louisiana. Let's get started. So here's briefly what the webinar will look like. We'll start by going over who REMI is, and we'll tell you a little bit about our models, because we've used our models to do all of the analysis that we're going to be showing you throughout the next half hour or so. And then we'll move right into the regional growth matrix that we've done. We've graphed all 50 states plus DC on two axes, population and employment, economic factors. So we'll tell you a little bit about how we did that, and then we'll see where Louisiana is on that graph. And then we will look at both the short and long-term economic forecasts for the US briefly, and then we'll dive into Louisiana. We will end with a brief model demonstration by my colleague May, who will show us actually what the model looks like live. And then hopefully we'll get that in just over half an hour, and then we'll leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So REMI, we were founded 41 years ago at this point on the idea that government decision makers and also private industry leaders should be cognizant of the consequences of their actions before implementing policy and other major decisions. So most of what we do here at REMI is building the model, building a couple different statistical econometric models that will forecast out, and then we put them in the hands of our clients, who then can operate the models themselves and get any number of levels of detailed analysis. Like it says here, we're the nation's leader in dynamic local, state, and national policy modeling. You can see a few of our clients, not nearly an exhaustive list, below here. All right, the reason why you all came, let's talk a little bit about Louisiana. So starting at the most zoomed out, the highest level, we've got a couple major industries in the state of Louisiana. Lumber is a big industry there, go figure, I didn't know that, as well as tree farms, mostly pine and other softwood trees. There is also a lot of drilling that happens in the state of Louisiana. It happened for a while inland and then quickly moved into offshore drilling in the Gulf, and that's drilling both petroleum and natural gas. And fun geological fact, oil and these salt domes often occur together beneath the rock, so they are mined side by side, or salt is a byproduct of the oil mining. The power in the state, Louisiana mostly gets it from natural gas, as you might imagine, and there's also at least one nuclear power plant in the state that supplies under a third, but some amount of nuclear power to the state. Major manufacturing in Louisiana includes many different types of chemicals, often byproducts of the drilling, petroleum processing, refining, as well as some transportation equipment manufacturing. And as most people probably know already, the cultural life in the state is incredibly vibrant, especially musically. So that's a little bit about the lovely state of Louisiana. So let's just take a quick snapshot at the short-term outlook. So what we've done here is we've run the REMI model from the years 2019 to the year 2023, 5-year window. You can see both graphs at right, showing that it actually doesn't quite get back up to full employment by the end of 2023, full pre-COVID employment. Though if we're just looking at the years 2020 and 2021, personal income in the state of Louisiana should grow by about 4.4% over the course of that time period, GDP by 4.8%, economic output by 4.7%, and we should, by the end of 2021, generate just over 100,000 new jobs in the state. So things are beginning to look up. As you can see, the jump, the bottom right graph from 2020 to 2021 in employment is certainly significant. I want to preface, all of these economic forecasts, so I'll say it once here at the beginning, and you might hear me repeat it again. Preface that uncertainty is always inherent in economic forecasting. There's a lot of open-ended questions that no one quite knows the answer to yet, right? Like how pent up is the consumer demand coming out of COVID, and what will the vaccine rollout look like? It's getting it's picking up steam, looking more and more optimistic, but there remains some uncertainty there, as well as many other, causes for uncertainty. So we should preface, all of this. It's bound to happen. I also want to say, before we go any further, we'll look at the data sources. So where do we get all of the data that we use to build our models? Again, because we've used our models to run all of these forecasts. So we get some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, forecast data, as well as from the Bureau of Economic Activity, the Congressional Budget Office, also the Census Bureau. And we do get a lot of our data recently from the University of Michigan's research seminar in quantitative economics, and they're actually releasing data quarterly rather than yearly. So we've been using their data to get as updated a picture as we can of the current state of things. And I'll just highlight that last bullet point, which is footnoting the University of Michigan's seminar. We've included in our forecast the recent stimulus at this point, a month or two ago, as well as, to the best of our ability, the current trajectory of the vaccine rollout and any consumer spending trends that we're beginning to see unfold. All right, so moving right into this regional growth matrix that I mentioned earlier. So we've got two axes, two factors here. So as you can see, the economic or sort of employment factors that we're looking at are determined by what industries are in the state. Are they growing? How fast are they growing? How well do they pay? How productive are they? What's the cost of business like? Those types of factors. And then demographically, population changes. We're looking at, as you might imagine, the age of the population, a number of people retiring, the immigration into and out of the state. What are the amenities, welfare, housing costs like in the state? So that's what's gone into them. And here I'll show you the 4 quadrants. As you can see, we've got population on the x-axis and employment or economic factors on the y-axis. So I'll start in the top right and we'll go around clockwise, beginning with our growth economies. So looking at states like Colorado and Texas and some others where both population and employment trends are relatively favorable. So the country has strong demographics, people are moving into the state and the population's growing, as well as strong economic trends. So industries are growing, pay is relatively high, plenty of room for growth, those types of things. So moving right along to the bottom right, we've got our lifestyle economies. Virginia is a good example of this. These are states where population trends remain favorable, so people want to move into the state, whether that's from retirees or tourists or whatever. People are actually coming to the state of Virginia quite often, even if the employment trends aren't as favorable. So industries may not be growing as fast. And otherwise the economy in the state might be slightly weaker than the national average. Our bottom left is our transitional economies. Maine and West Virginia are both decent examples of this. These are states where both population and employment trends are looking, they're below the national average that we're seeing. So the economic prospects are slightly weaker, demographic trends aren't looking as promising, but often these states are undergoing some sort of major transition. And last but not least, top left, we've got our Renaissance economies. Massachusetts is a great example. These are states where employment trends are fairly favorable. So, industries continue to be doing well in the state, whether that's old industries being replaced by newer growing ones or, perennially high pay or other, economic factors that cause a lot of economic activity. But on the population side of things, we're seeing lower than average trends. So fewer people are moving into the state for whatever reason. So those are our 4 quadrants. Let's now see where Louisiana is on it. Here you go. As you can see, it's a Renaissance economy, we've called it. I want to preface this by saying we're just looking at comparison to the US average over the course of 2021 and 2022, this year and next year. So we're seeing Louisiana have employment trends that are actually slightly better than the national average over the next 2 years. We expect to see industries bouncing back quite quickly from COVID and there to be a lot of economic activity in the state. However, the population trends just over the next 2 years are significantly lower than the national average. for reasons that we'll begin to get into later in the presentation. So there you go, that's our growth matrix. I'll pause for a second here. So we're going to zoom back out, look at the entire United States, look at short and long-term trends, and then we'll glance back in at Louisiana and look at employment and population trends slightly more in depth. And then we'll end with the model demonstration. So the US, just again over this 5-year time period from 2019 to 2023, you can see a big dip in 2020 in most industries. Actually, personal income in the US didn't take that much of a dip in 2020. We expect to see over the next, I don't know, 8 months at this point, you know, from 2020 to the end of 2021, a personal income growth of 2.9%, GDP and output growth of 4.4%, and about 7 million jobs added total by the end of the year. As you can see, by 2023, we just get above the pre-COVID employment levels of 2019. Looking more long-term, REMI's models can forecast out to 2060. So we've done that. We've forecasted out the next 40 years, this year included. And as you can see, the average growth rate per year in personal income is about 1.9%. GDP, it's about 1.8%. Output 1.9% as well per year. And we expect to see just over 1 million jobs added to the US economy each year over the next 40. All of these slides will be available later, so you can take a closer look at this graph if you'd like. Zooming right back in to Louisiana, our short-term outlook, we can see, again, here we're just looking at 2020 and 2021, industries that are growing the fastest. So those would be healthcare and social assistance, as you can see, is a big blue category. We've also got a big other category that's green, which I'll tell you right now what's in it. Repair and maintenance is in the green category, personal laundry services, religious organizations, civic organizations, those types of things, as well as any private household jobs. So again, this is just until the end of 2021, we expect to see just under 40,000 jobs increasing in those fastest growing industries. And we'll look now at those industries, the ones with highest average annual compensation rates. So you can see manufacturing is up there in orange, wholesale trade below it, and then we've got mining third and the rest below. So clearly there's a dip in 2020, but most industries begin to climb back out of that, at least by 2022. So that's the short term. Let's look at the population trends again in the short term. This is a quick snapshot of what the population pyramid looks like right now, or I guess at the end of this year. It's a pretty stationary population pyramid. So it's, you know, a stationary pyramid is used to describe a population that is not growing or shrinking. Usually are, you know, characteristic of a state with a fairly developed economy and low birth rates and relatively high quality of life. There's some interesting sort of waves in this Louisiana pyramid. I'm intrigued by that. Looking slightly more in depth at population, this graph's a little complicated to read, but we start on the left and read it like a book from left to right. So our starting population here is 4,600,000 in the state of Louisiana, and births take us up by 58,000 almost, and as you can see, there are more births than deaths. The state of Louisiana, like we said, population trends aren't looking quite as good. So retirees slightly are leaving the state to go to other states, and people are leaving the state for other reasons. So for economic prospects in other states, or you know, whatever reason, people are leaving. Economic migrants are leaving the state of Louisiana to go to other states. But as you can see, Louisiana is getting some international migrants. The ending population in 2021 is slightly less than it was at the beginning of 2020, interestingly enough. Again, this is just in the very short term. So now we'll look more long term. Again, this 40-year time period out to 2060, average growth rate per year in Louisiana. should be about 1.8% in personal income, 1.7% in GDP growth per year, 1.8% in economic output per year, and about 10,000 jobs should be added to the state each year on average. Again, we'll look at this employment by industry. As you can see, healthcare is a much greater percentage of the fastest growing industries in the state. This all other green category is smaller, again, religious, civic, grant-making organizations, and any private household jobs. Mining is a sliver, a pretty significant sliver, and professional, scientific, and technical services, also a big sliver. Accommodation and food services will also grow pretty dramatically in Louisiana. I don't know if that's tourism related or not. We expect to see just under 300,000 jobs increasing in those industries over the next 40 years. Looking again at these highest paying industries, as you can see, manufacturing, mining, and wholesale trade at the top now. Mining going up and up in number of jobs, employment, wholesale trade actually going down slightly over the next 40 years, interestingly. On the whole, manufacturing remaining relatively stagnant after that 2020 blip, though, as you can see, a little bit of a dip in the 2030s. That's what the model's projecting. This is a population pyramid long term. As you can see, it's going over the course of the next 4 decades. The year bar is at the bottom. I'll let it run again. Going through the 2040s into 2050s. And we'll end there at 2060. So there's a snapshot at 2060. It's pretty constrictive population pyramid now, which means the population is elderly and shrinking. Usually there are, as you can very clearly see at the base of this pyramid, there are fewer people in the younger age cohorts, as well as a large number of people in the older cohorts. So these types of population pyramids are characteristic of countries with, high economic and social development states, and access to quality education and healthcare. But, significant problems in terms of care for an aging population, potentially. Again, we've got this population graph. We'll start at the left. Births and deaths almost equalize, and retirees moving in and out of the state is equal as well. Over the next 40 years, there actually should be both international migrants moving in from other countries and economic migrants, we call them, moving from other states to Louisiana for economic reasons, and only a tiny drop in special populations, which include prisons and a couple others. So the ending population is higher, but not significantly higher than it was 40 years ago. All right, now I'm going to hand things over to my capable colleague, May, who will show us a live demonstration of the model.
Thank you, Julian. In the model demonstration part, sorry about that. In the model demonstration part, we will run the scenario of an optimistic outlook. We have seen the national baseline courtesy of the RSQE, CBO, and BEA, where the total employment slowly comes back, accompanied by the steady growth. But as Julian mentioned, there will be a lot of uncertainty, including large pent-up consumer demand, supports vaccine, and also stimulus checks. It is very difficult to quantify all these impacts, but we would like to try a little experiment inspired by Janet Yellen, who predicted that economy could be back to full employment by the end of this year, 2021. We wanted to test what growth we will have to see in the economy. Apology again. Yeah, my apartment is having this fire alarm testing, so please bear me with that. And after testing, we imported a macroeconomic update increasing the GDP growth rate by 2%. Now let's see how the employment changes both on the national level and state level. So here on the left, there is total employment in the Sorry, if we could move to the next slide. Yep, so here on the left, we have the US employment, and on the right, we have the total employment for Louisiana, with the blue lines representing our baseline forecast and the orange lines representing the forecast where growth in every component of GDP has been increased by 2%. So if consumption grew by 0.5% from year to year, now it grows at 2.5%. With that, the US gets back to normal by 2021 and begins to exceed its previous employment in 2022 and 2023. Louisiana is having a very similar recovery. Bear in mind that a 2% increase in components of GDP is very optimistic. So only if the vaccine rollout continues smoothly or even ahead of schedule, and also if consumer confidence really picks up, we might see something approaching this. Now we're going to show off the model and explore more about the job increase from the baseline forecast to the optimistic outlook. Okay, the model we're using is the 51 region model, which covers the 50 states as well as the DC area. We're looking at the home screen of REMI model PI+. Its purpose is to provide quick and simple access points for starting the use of REMI model and to simulate the policy changes. By clicking on the appropriate tile, you're able to start creating any one of the 4 types of forecasts available in PI+. There are regional simulations, national simulations, regional controls, and national controls. Also, if you're interested in exploring REMI's default control, the forecast that form the basis of the model, you can dig directly into the data by clicking on the regional forecast or the national forecast. We can do regional forecast as an example here. The selected forecast will be opened. Here, and some specific tables, maps, and data visualizations have been specially chosen to display REMI's baseline forecasts and also provide informative profiles of the national or regional economies. So after the forecast, for the short-term and long-term outlook, we were using the new national control here, but here for the optimistic outlook, we're doing it again, but here for the macroeconomic values instead of the baseline, as known as the update March 2021, we're using the custom update, which is the optimistic outlook with a 2% increase in GDP components. We have edited as a macroeconomic change in the input list, and the next step is to run the forecast. So let's skip the running and come directly into the results section. Here we can see the change we just imported. Here we have the lower line as the baseline and the upper line for the regional simulation for optimistic outlook. The gap here shows what we have just imported, and as a result, let's look at the total employment. Again, we have the lower line as the baseline and upper one for the optimistic outlook. We can see the gap here, which means the differences between the total employment of these two outlooks is increasing over years. But to have a better understanding of the employment, we can dig deeper into the employment by industry. So here we're looking at the employment by industry. Instead of the levels, we're looking at the comparison type of differences. So it's showing the job increase from the baseline to the optimistic outlook. If we zoom in, we can look at the top industries, which includes state and local government, healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, as well as accommodation, and food services. And besides differences, another very interesting comparison type is percentage change. So for differences, we're looking at the industries that contribute the most job increases, which is the actual number of jobs. But here for the percentage change, we can know which industries are growing the fastest. So they are federal, civilian, federal, military, as well as farm industry. Hopefully this function can give you a better idea what is happening behind the increasing total employment. Thank you for listening, and I'm giving it back to Julian for the conclusion.
Thank you, May. So what have we learned today? Well, first, I know we're sounding like broken records, but economic forecasting is hard. There are some things that you just can't predict, including a national pandemic, as well as, higher uncertainty because of change in federal administration, other changes in government, and on top of the general uncertainty around the economy. So we've said it enough times. However, REMI actually can help. It does a lot to include as much data as possible. So we often talk about 3 C's of modeling, the 3 reasons why people might use the REMI model. So the first is, to clarify or pick apart a complex problem and highlight the specific connections between it. Second is to calculate, the quantitative hard data, study those complex systems in detail. And the third is to communicate better to the public or to policymakers, by making the economic impact argument. So because our models are dynamic, showing changes over time, and the effects that happen in one year affect what happens in the next year. Because of those features, we can ask the conditional question, the what if question. So that's really sort of where the heart of the power of the REMI model lies. And the last thing I'll say, it's in our name, but it bears repeating, our models are regional. So we at REMI think that in order to see the big picture, economic modeling needs to also zoom in and look at the more detailed regional effects of policy. That's why we're hosting this webinar series. So thanks so much for listening, tuning in.